So WWDC was last week, and aside from some glassy stuff, there were a few gaming related announcements, including Apple partnering with a certain PS5 console maker. Wait, why not just say Sony? It's Sunday, so let's get sensational. I'm Mike, and I'm back to talk about the gaming news. And it's that time of year where Apple does their Worldwide Developers Conference, which I used to cover on this channel back in the day when I talked about tech in general. But now that the channel is more gaming focused, I don't really talk about Apple as much. But there were a few game related announcements at WWDC we're going to talk about today, since there were previous rumors about these announcements. So let's kick it off with the Apple Vision Pro. So if you're not familiar with Apple's $3,500 headset, sorry, I always forget how expensive it is. It's considered one of the best VR/AR experiences for computing, but it was lacking in the gaming department, and this was due to them choosing gesture-based navigation instead of just having controllers. Generally, I heard the navigation works really well. I haven't tried the headset myself, well, because I'm too broke, but in gaming, it's not ideal. So Apple reached out to Sony and was like, let me borrow those PSVR 2 controllers real quick. So this partnership could mean games like Beat Saber coming to the headset. It depends if developers feel like there's enough of an install base where it's worth porting or creating games for the Apple Vision Pro. And given the price, it's really not clear how well it sold. But either way, having the option to use controllers with it is a huge improvement. But we're not done talking about Apple and gaming just yet, because another recent rumor was that Apple was going to do a unified gaming launcher across iPhone, iPad, and macOS that would include Apple Arcade games as well as other games, and they did officially announce it at WWDC. So yeah, it's Apple's version of Steam basically. It'll have friends, leaderboards, achievements, and they're also going to have challenges for some games as well. The thing I'm the most curious about is the Mac version, and if they'll allow you to add games from Steam, and if so, how easy it'll be to do that. Now, the second part of the rumor was it was going to launch around the same time as the Switch 2, which isn't true. This app is just part of Apple's upcoming OS releases this fall. There is a developer beta out now, so it's kind of out, but not releasing to the general public. Now, personally, I've never liked Game Center or the way that Apple tried to handle games previously, so I'm hoping that this is an improvement, but I'm not installing the beta to find out. I'll just wait until the official release in fall to try it. But one thing I did try as soon as it came out was the Switch 2. And apparently a lot of other people did too. So the Switch 2 has been out for about a week and a half now, and apparently it's already breaking new records for Nintendo. So Nintendo has announced that the Switch 2 has sold 3.5 million consoles over the first 4 days of release. According to the GameSpot article, the Switch 1 sold 2.74 million units in its first month. And according to analyst Daniel Ahmad, the Switch 2 selling 3.5 million in 4 days would make it the biggest console launch of all time as far as home consoles. They also note that the PS5 shipped 3.4 million in the same time frame, but that's shipped and not sold. But of course, that launch they were dealing with a chip shortage, so it's possible if things weren't as crazy during the PS5 launch, it may have actually beat the Switch 2's record. But while everything is going well sales-wise with the Switch 2, they have run into an issue software-wise. Apparently, some Switch 2 owners have been experiencing an issue where the battery life isn't displayed correctly. Nintendo has acknowledged it, and they have instructions on how to fix it if it does happen, which seems pretty simple. So yeah, it's not really a huge deal, and it's kind of expected with a new console for there to be some small issues. When I got the Switch 1, I had a Joy-Con that kept disconnecting and I had to send it in for service. My first PS5 had an issue where it didn't wake from sleep if I didn't use it for a few days. So this overall seems like a pretty small issue for the Switch 2. I personally haven't experienced it with my Switch 2, knock on wood. But the main thing I'm worried about is if they actually fix the Joy-Con drift issue from the Switch 1, but only time will tell. But similar to the Switch 1 Joy-Cons, we're going to go ahead and drift off to the land of layoffs because it's that time of week again. So Sony has announced more layoffs, and this time it's from Ben Studio, the developer of Days Gone. So it was initially reported by Bloomberg that Sony laid off around 1/3 of the employees at Ben Studio. This is following the cancellation of an unannounced live service game that they were working on. Sony then came out and confirmed that they did make workforce reductions at the studio, but they are working on a new project. While Sony didn't confirm how many people were laid off, it's being reported by Kotaku that it was around 40 people. Sony did say the decision wasn't made lightly, and they're grateful for the former employees' contributions. There wasn't anything mentioned by Sony about helping the employees through the transition, but hopefully they're offering them some kind of help. But this just seems to be the latest in layoffs from Sony since they made their shift away from live service games and they decided they didn't want to put a bunch of money into it. Even though they did recently claim that they're still dedicated to live service games and that Marathon is going to be successful and they learned from their mistakes from Concord. but we'll see. Alright, so far we've talked about Nintendo and we talked about Sony today, but what about Microsoft? Well, they had a pretty big announcement last week, and that's what we're going to talk about today in our final story. So the timing of my video last week was unfortunate because shortly before it went up, Microsoft officially announced the ROG Xbox Ally and the Xbox Ally X. So the white version of the handheld, the ROG Ally, is going to have a Ryzen Z2A processor, 16 gigabytes of LPDDR5X RAM at 6400 mega transfers per second, a 512 gig SSD, which is actually a standard size SSD as far as its physical size. They're going to use a 2280 this time, so it should be way cheaper to upgrade, 2 USB-C Gen 2 ports, and a 60 watt-hour battery. Now, both versions of the handheld will have a Wi-Fi 6E card, Bluetooth 5.4, and use the same screen, which is basically the same screen as the current ROG Ally and Ally X. It's a 7-inch 1080p IPS display up to 120 Hz with VRR support. Now, the black version, aka the ROG Xbox Ally X, they really need to do something with these names. That version is going to have the AMD Ryzen AI Z2 Extreme processor, another bad name, 24 gigs of LPDDR5X at 8000 mega transfers per second, so more RAM and faster RAM than the standard Xbox Ally. It's going to have 2 USB-C ports, but one of them is Thunderbolt 4 capable instead of just being 2 USB 3.2 ports, which means you could do things like use a Thunderbolt compatible eGPU with the Ally X. And of course, the battery is 80 watt hours instead of 60 on the regular Ally. So it's a very similar split to what they're doing now with the ROG Ally and the ROG Ally X, except the original Ally, which I have, there was a version of the handheld that ran the Z1 Extreme, which was the same processor that's in the Ally X. And of course, there was an even cheaper Ally that ran the Z1 that didn't have as good a performance, but you kind of had that middle spec where at least you got most of the performance of the Ally X without the additional RAM and battery capacity. So I feel like this is actually a bigger split than the current generation of their handhelds from an ROG perspective. Now, of course, they haven't set a price yet, but it makes more sense, I guess, for them just to have 2 SKUs because they're probably gonna have one that's gonna be quite a bit cheaper, and then of course the X is probably going to be expensive. Now, of course, they haven't mentioned anything about pricing at all, but I think they might be targeting $500 to $600 with the regular Xbox Ally. I mean, if we're basing it off the current prices of the ROG Ally and the ROG Ally X. Now, the ROG Ally X right now is $900, so the Xbox Ally X might be around that price. But either way, both models are supposed to launch holiday 2025, so we should find out within the next 6 months. Also, side note, I know I previously made fun of the grips, and while I still think they don't look great, I think the pictures that were leaked just made them look smaller because the screen is slightly angled, so from the front, the grips do look smaller. I'm still not a fan of how the design looks, but it's not as bad as I initially thought. But design and hardware aside, the biggest part of the announcement is that they are doing a more handheld-friendly version of Windows 11 without a lot of the extra processors running in the background. It's basically going to have an Xbox launcher which can add games from other sources like Steam and Epic Game Store. They're also supposed to be working on the sleep and wake functionality of Windows, and they're claiming so far that they can save up to 2 gigabytes of RAM usage just by reducing system resources. But the best part is a new version of Windows isn't just going to be for the ROG Xbox handheld, as Microsoft's VP confirmed that they're working on making it compatible first with the previous generation of ROG Ally and Ally X, and they hope to have it available for other handhelds next year. I previously talked about Microsoft potentially losing ground to Valve in the handheld OS space, so this Windows overhaul seems like it's their big push to compete against Steam OS finally. But while Microsoft announced this ROG Xbox Ally and the Ally X last week, it's also being reported that their rumored upcoming handheld has now been completely canceled. So I talked about this rumor a few weeks ago, but it was rumored that they were going to do another handheld with the launch of their next generation consoles to basically replace the Xbox Series S as their lower end option. But it was put on hold while they were trying to focus on making Windows better for their other handhelds, including the ROG Xbox Ally with long names. But anyway, it's now being reported that that handheld is just overall canceled. Now, of course, this is all speculation since it was never officially announced in the first place. Personally, I always thought it'd be kind of confusing for them to do an Xbox branded handheld that's basically a PC and then do a first party console like Handheld a couple of years later. So it does make sense if they're canceling this, especially because they started releasing all their games on PC the same day as Xbox last generation. So as far as their first party games, the current handheld Windows-based PCs on the market can play those, and the upcoming Xbox Ally can play those as well. So the device didn't make as much sense. I thought it would still be cool to see what they could do hardware-wise, but I can understand why they just wouldn't want to do it now. But the cancellation itself has led to speculation about what the next Xbox might look like, and some analysts think it might look more like the ROG Xbox Ally. So some analysts are speculating that this ROG partnership may be the beginning of Microsoft getting out of hardware, and they may just have other companies make Xbox branded PCs that run this lighter version of Windows. And like I mentioned earlier, all of their first party games release on PC anyway, so they could just let people make an Xbox branded PC that runs this new Windows interface, and all their games will still be available there. Then they could still release games on Sony and Nintendo's consoles for people who want a more traditional console experience. And of course, they have the cloud streaming portion of this. And this would make sense with their focus shifting heavily to Game Pass and getting subscribers there versus selling hardware. I do think that we'll probably get one more traditional Xbox console, but they could use this to get out of making hardware in the future. But let me know what you think about the ROG Xbox Ally and the ROG Xbox Ally X. That was a lot to say. Down in the comments. And until next time, if you enjoyed this video, then make sure to tell a friend, tell a coworker, like, share, and subscribe, and hit that bell notification button thing to be notified when I drop a video or a live stream. And always do at least 2 things at the same time. Peace.